For years, Elvis thought he was getting free lunch because of a paperwork error. When he discovered the truth about who really paid, he broke down crying. It was September 1948, and 13-year-old Elvis Presley was starting 8th grade at Humes High School in Memphis, Tennessee. The Presley family had just moved from Tupelo to Memphis a few months earlier, hoping for better job opportunities. They were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Lauderdale Courts, a public housing project for poor families. Vernon, Elvis's father, was struggling to find steady work, and Gladys, his mother, was taking in ironing and doing whatever odd job she could find. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been. There were days when the Presleys ate nothing but cornbread and beans. There were weeks when they had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries. And there were mornings when Elvis went to school with an empty stomach, knowing there'd be no lunch money in his pocket. Elvis tried to hide his hunger from the other kids. He'd perfected the art of looking like he wasn't hungry, of acting like he'd already eaten, of disappearing during lunch period so nobody would notice he wasn't in the cafeteria. Sometimes he'd go to the library. Sometimes he'd sit in the bathroom. Anywhere but the lunchroom, where the smell of food would make his stomach growl so loud he was afraid people would hear it. But you can't hide hunger from everyone, especially not from someone who's been watching. Her name was Betty Anderson, and she'd been working in the Humes High School cafeteria for 7 years. She was a black woman in her late 40s, a widow who'd lost her husband in a factory accident 3 years earlier. She had 2 kids of her own to feed on a cafeteria worker's salary, which wasn't much. Betty knew what hunger looked like because she'd seen it in her own mirror plenty of times, and she saw it in Elvis Presley's face every single day. Elvis would walk past the cafeteria during lunch period, trying to look casual, trying to look like he had somewhere important to be. But Betty noticed the way his eyes lingered on the food. She noticed how thin he was getting. She noticed the worn-out clothes that hung loose on his frame and the shoes with cardboard stuffed in them to cover the holes in the soles. Most of all, she noticed that this boy never, ever came through her lunch line. One day in late September, Betty was restocking supplies in the back of the kitchen when she overheard 2 teachers talking. "That Presley boy is going to pass out if he doesn't eat something soon," one of them said. "I know," the other replied. "But what can we do? The family can't afford the lunch program. I asked the principal about getting him on the free lunch list, but apparently they make just a tiny bit too much money to qualify. It's ridiculous." "It's tragic is what it is," the first teacher said. "The boy's clearly talented. I've heard him sing in music class. But how's he supposed to learn anything when he's starving?" Betty listened to this conversation and felt something crack open in her chest. She knew exactly what it was like to be on the wrong side of arbitrary poverty lines, to make too much to qualify for help, but not nearly enough to actually survive. Her own family had been in that same impossible situation. That afternoon, after the lunch period ended and the kitchen was being cleaned, Betty approached Mrs. Clara Phillips, the head of the cafeteria operations. "Mrs. Phillips," Betty said carefully, "I need to ask you about something." "What is it, Betty?" "That Presley boy, the one in 8th grade. I've noticed he never eats lunch, never comes through the line at all." Mrs. Phillips sighed. "I know. His family can't afford it, and they don't qualify for the free lunch program. There's nothing we can do about it." "District policy. What if somebody wanted to pay for his lunches?" Betty asked, anonymous-like. "Could that be arranged?" Mrs. Phillips studied Betty's face. She knew exactly how much a cafeteria worker made, and she knew Betty was raising 2 kids on her own. "Betty, you can barely afford to feed your own children." "I didn't say it was me," Betty replied, though they both knew she was lying. "I'm just asking if it's possible." Mrs. Phillips was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If someone were to leave money with me, let's say, enough to cover a student's lunch for a week or a month, I suppose I could mark that student's account as paid. No names, no questions asked. And the student would never know who paid?" "Not from me, they wouldn't," Betty nodded. "I'll bring you some money tomorrow." "Enough for a month, and every month after that, long as I can manage it." "Betty, that boy's got something special about him," Betty interrupted. "I can feel it. He's got a light in him, Mrs. Phillips, but you can't shine when you're running on empty. Somebody's got to help him. And if nobody else is going to do it, then I will. The next day, Betty came to work with $13 carefully counted out. A month's worth of school lunches at 25 cents per day, plus a little extra. It represented almost a full day's wages for her. It meant her own kids would eat a lot of rice and beans that month. It meant she wouldn't be able to afford the new shoes her daughter desperately needed. But Betty had made peace with her decision. Mrs. Phillips took the money and put it in an envelope marked with Elvis's name. "I'll tell him his account got credited due to a paperwork correction," she said. "Some mix-up with the district office." "That'll work," Betty said. "Thank you, Mrs. Phillips." That afternoon, Elvis was heading to the library during lunch period when Mrs. Phillips caught up with him in the hallway. "Elvis Presley?" she called out. Elvis turned around, looking nervous. "Yes, ma'am? I need you to come to the cafeteria office for a moment." Elvis's heart sank. He figured he was in trouble for something, though he couldn't imagine what. He followed Mrs. Phillips to the small office behind the cafeteria. "Elvis, I was going through some paperwork, and it looks like there was an error in your account," Mrs. Phillips said, pulling out a ledger book. "According to this, your lunch fees were supposed to be covered by the district. Some kind of administrative mix-up. It's all sorted out now." Elvis stared at her, not understanding. "Ma'am, what I'm saying is, you have a lunch account now. It's paid up through the end of the month. Starting tomorrow, you can come through the line and get your lunch just like everyone else." Elvis felt his throat tighten. "Are you sure? My daddy we didn't pay for—" "It's a paperwork issue," Mrs. Phillips said firmly. "The district made an error, and now it's been corrected. That's all you need to know. Now, you're too thin, young man. I expect to see you in that lunch line tomorrow. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Elvis whispered. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. Thank the district office for catching their mistake." The next day, Elvis walked through the lunch line for the first time. His hands were shaking as he picked up his tray, certain that at any moment someone would stop him and tell him there'd been another mistake, that he couldn't eat after all. But nobody stopped him. Betty, working behind the serving counter, gave him generous portions of everything and a kind smile. "You eat up now," she said. "Growing boy like you needs his strength." "Thank you, ma'am," Elvis said, and something about the warmth in her voice made him feel like maybe things were going to be okay. For the next 4 years, through the rest of 8th grade, all of high school, Elvis ate lunch at Humes High School, never knowing that a cafeteria worker named Betty Anderson was paying for his meals out of her own tiny salary. Every month, Betty would give Mrs. Phillips money for Elvis's lunches, and every month she'd tell her own kids that they were having creative meals that month, her way of saying they'd be eating a lot of cheap food so Elvis Presley could eat at school. Betty never told Elvis. She never told anyone except Mrs. Phillips. She watched Elvis grow stronger, watched him gain weight, watched him become more confident. She heard him singing in the hallways and saw the way other students started paying attention to him, and she felt proud, knowing that she was playing a small part in keeping this boy's light burning. In June 1953, Elvis graduated from Humes High School. Betty stood in the back of the auditorium during the ceremony, crying as she watched him walk across that stage. He'd made it. Against all odds, the poor boy who'd been starving when she first saw him had made it through high school. After graduation, Elvis got a job driving a truck and started pursuing his music more seriously. Betty moved on to another job at a different school. Life went on. Then, in 1954, Elvis recorded "That's All Right" at Sun Records, and suddenly the whole world was paying attention to him. By 1956, Elvis Presley was a national sensation. Betty heard his songs on the radio and saw his picture in magazines. She'd tell her kids, "I used to feed that boy lunch," and they'd roll their eyes because parents always claimed to know famous people. But Betty knew she'd done more than just feed him. She'd kept him alive during a crucial time when he could have given up on everything. She never tried to contact Elvis. She didn't want anything from him. What she'd done from the heart, and that was enough. But in 1965, something happened that changed everything. Elvis was performing a concert in Memphis, his first hometown show in several years. Before the concert, he was being interviewed by a local reporter who asked him about his time at Humes High School. "Those were hard years," Elvis admitted. "My family didn't have much, There were a lot of days when I didn't know if we'd eat. How did you get through it? The reporter asked. My mama's faith and love, mostly, Elvis said, and the fact that somehow, miraculously, the school district made a paperwork error that meant I could eat lunch at school. I never understood exactly how that happened, but that free lunch probably saved my life. The interview aired on local television. Betty was watching at home with her daughter when she heard Elvis talk about the paperwork error. "Mama, what's wrong?" her daughter asked, seeing tears streaming down Betty's face. "That wasn't no paperwork error," Betty whispered. "That was me. I paid for his lunches. Every month for 4 years, I paid for that boy to eat." Her daughter stared at her mother in shock. "Mama, why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because I didn't do it for credit. I did it because it was right." But Betty's daughter, now grown with children of her own, decided her mother's sacrifice deserved to be acknowledged. Without telling Betty, she wrote a letter to Elvis's management company, explaining what her mother had done all those years ago. 3 weeks later, there was a knock on Betty's door. When she opened it, she found 2 well-dressed men standing there. "Mrs. Betty Anderson?" one of them asked. "Yes." "My name is Joe Esposito, and I work for Elvis Presley. Could we come in and talk to you for a moment?" Betty's heart started racing. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, ma'am." Quite the opposite. Betty invited them in, her hands shaking as she offered them coffee. Joe explained that Elvis had received the letter about what Betty had done. "Mrs. Anderson, Elvis had no idea," Joe said. "All these years, he thought it really was a paperwork error. When he found out it was you, that you'd been paying for his lunches out of your own salary while raising 2 kids alone, he broke down crying. He cried for an hour straight." Betty wiped her own tears. "I didn't want him to know. I didn't want nothing from him. We know that, ma'am. That's what makes this so special. But Elvis wants to thank you properly, if you'll let him." 2 days later, a limousine picked up Betty and drove her to Graceland. She was terrified and excited and overwhelmed all at once. When she arrived, Elvis himself opened the door. He took one look at Betty Anderson, the woman who'd fed him when he was starving, and he started crying right there on the steps of Graceland. He wrapped her in a hug and couldn't speak for several minutes. "Mrs. Anderson," he finally managed, "I had no idea. All these years I thought. I never knew it was you." "You weren't supposed to know," Betty said, crying just as hard. "I didn't do it for recognition, Elvis. I did it because you were a hungry child and I had the power to help. You saved my life," Elvis said. "There were days when I wanted to quit school, quit everything. But because of you, because I had food in my belly and strength in my body, I kept going. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, none of it would have happened if you hadn't helped me." Elvis spent 3 hours with Betty that day, talking about those high school years, thanking her over and over. Before she left, Elvis handed her an envelope. "Mrs. Anderson, I can't ever repay what you did for me, but I want to try. Inside this envelope is a check. It's enough to pay off your house, buy a new car, and live comfortably for the rest of your life." Betty tried to protest, but Elvis wouldn't hear it. "You spent 4 years sacrificing for me," Elvis said. "You fed me when you could barely feed your own kids. You kept my dreams alive when you had every reason to focus on your own struggles. Please, let me do this, not because I owe you, though I do, but because I want you to know that your kindness wasn't wasted. It created something beautiful, and now that beauty wants to give back." Betty accepted the envelope with shaking hands. Later, she'd find out it contained a check for $50,000, more money than she'd make in 10 lifetimes of cafeteria work. But Elvis wasn't done. He also set up a trust fund for Betty's grandchildren's education and arranged for her to have free health care for life. He invited her to concerts and treated her like royalty whenever she visited Graceland. Most importantly, Elvis told Betty's story publicly. He talked about her in interviews, made sure people knew that a cafeteria worker's kindness had helped create the king of rock and roll. "People always ask me how I made it," Elvis would say. "The truth is, I didn't make it alone. I made it because people like Betty Anderson saw a hungry kid and decided to help, even though helping me meant she had less for herself. That's the real heroism Betty Anderson lived until 1983, long enough to see Elvis become a legend and to know that her sacrifice had mattered." At her funeral, Elvis's former bandmates attended, bringing flowers from the Presley family and a note from Elvis that he'd written years earlier, to be delivered when Betty passed. The note said simply, "Thank you for feeding a hungry boy. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. Thank you for teaching me that kindness is the most powerful force in the world. Everything good I ever did came from trying to be like you." Elvis. Betty's story reminds us that we never know when a small act of kindness will change the world. She didn't feed Elvis because she thought he'd become famous. She fed him because he was hungry, and she had the power to help, even though helping him cost her dearly. For 4 years, Betty Anderson sacrificed her own family's comfort to keep Elvis Presley's dreams alive. She never asked for credit, never sought recognition, never expected anything in return. But her kindness created ripples that are still spreading today, decades after both she and Elvis have passed away. The story of the lunch lady and the king proves that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is help someone when they can't help themselves. Sometimes feeding a hungry child is how you change music history. If this story of silent sacrifice and profound gratitude touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Let us know in the comments if someone ever helped you during a difficult time, or if you've had the chance to help someone who needed it. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is give without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, years later, the universe finds a way to say thank you.